broadcast of the Minneapolis Board of Estimate and Taxation will now begin.
Let me see, that's me then, right? Good afternoon, welcome to this live broadcast of our virtual meeting, our first virtual live broadcast. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statutes, section 13D.021. Due to the declared local health pandemics, for the record, my name is Carol Becker, and I am the president of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so we may verify the presence of a quorum. Clerk.
Board Member Fry.
Here.
Cogill.
Here.
Wheeler. Bender.
Here.
Fletcher.
Here.
Member Wheeler. President Becker.
Aye.
There are 5 members present.
All right, I would like to move to the, thank you very much. With that, we will proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. For all voting, a roll call procedure will be used. So first item is the adoption of the agenda. Board members, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Do I have a, thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Madam President, a roll
Aye.
call is in order.
Oh, I'm sorry. I will need to go do a roll call for the agenda. I apologize for that. Clerk's office, please.
Board Member Fry.
Aye.
Cogill.
Aye.
Wheeler. Bender.
Aye.
I'm here. Sorry.
Wheeler. How do you vote on the adoption of the agenda?
Yes.
Board Member Fletcher.
Aye.
President Becker.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes and no nays.
All right. I would like to then move to acceptance of the minutes. Again, we'll need a roll call. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a proper motion before us. Is there any discussion before the clerk calls the roll? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Board Member Fry.
Aye.
Cogill.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Abstain.
President Becker.
Aye. Motion
Sure.
passes. The minutes are accepted. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There are 5 ayes and 1 abstention.
Motion passes. The minutes are accepted as presented. I'd like to move first to new business. Item 4 on the agenda is a resolution authorizing the issuance and sale of bonds for assessments for 4th Street improvement projects, one areaway abandonment and removal as requested by the City Council. May I have a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
I have a proper motion before us. Is there any discussion before the clerk calls the roll? Any discussion on the assessment bonds? With that, seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Board Member Fry.
Aye.
Cogill.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
President Becker.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes and no nays.
That brings us to the discussion items for today's meeting. The first is a report from the City Assessor. Patrick Todd, are you here, Mr. Todd?
Yes, I am, President Becker.
Awesome.
Perfect. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Today I'm here to, or good afternoon, members of the Board of Estimate Taxation, Patrick Todd, the Minneapolis City Assessor. I'm here to give you the highlight, what I would call the highlight reel of the 2020 assessment report for the Board of Estimate Taxation, which much of the material was also presented at the Ways and Means Committee in March, but I did add a few additional slides that I felt would be meaningful to the Board of Estimate and Taxation. So we can go straight ahead. What I would like to do is I'd like to get through my 10 slides and then answer questions if that's possible. Thank you. So the first slide, next slide. Just as a high-level summary, we did do 125,000 valuations for the January 2nd assessment. We have had valuation notices mailed out in March. The 2020 assessment is for the 2021 tax bill. And then the assessment, when we established the January 2nd values for the 2020 assessment, that was based on sales that had occurred between October of 18 and September of 19. And this is really important just because we're getting a lot of taxpayers that are calling and wondering if we're going to make an adjustment to their value because of the pandemic. And our reply to them is because the pandemic wasn't prevalent in the real estate market between the 18 and 19 assessment or the sales, that we would be looking at that for the next assessment, but not the current one. So next slide. This shows the 10-year growth by assessment year. There are probably 3 or 4 elements that I would point out here. So if we look at the 2010, I've got to adjust my screen, I apologize. There we go. So for 2010, we had a $34.5 billion assessment, but today we have a 58.7 assessment. Right now, that is a 70% growth in tax base in 10 years. Probably the most notable of that growth is what we see that in 2010, the apartment segment of our tax base was at 9.7. Today it's at 19.8, which is about 105% growth in the apartment tax base. On the other side, we do have, in 2010, we had 68.3% of our tax base in 2010 was residential, where today it's only 58.5%. So we see a shift in between the growth of apartments and then the and what percent of apartments is of the total. So next slide. This is an interesting slide because now this shows net tax capacity. So in the net tax capacity, that's the property's taxable market value multiplied by its tax rate. So when we take a look at this, it mirrors very much the growth in tax base. If we take a look at the 2010, it was 9.2% of the tax capacity was in apartments. Today, it's 18.9%. Of our tax base is carried by the apartments. When we take a look at residential, in 2010, it was 56% of the tax base was carried by the residential, and today it's 47%. And the reason why this is interesting is because when property tax payers will say, boy, with all this new construction, shouldn't my taxes be less? And this is the slide that I would show them, because technically, back in 2010, the residential property tax base carried 56% of the tax burden. Today, they're only carrying 47.4% of the tax burden because the apartments has grown, again, that 105%. So if this is a great slide when we're trying to say we're providing property tax relief for property owners, because this statistic proves it out. Next slide. This is just estimated market value by community. The most notable would be in the central community, which really carries much of the downtown central business district. You'd see in the downtown central business district, it's $14.9 billion. Probably 3/4 of it is made up of the commercial, industrial, and apartment, and then about 1/4 of that remaining value would be in the residential property tax base. Next slide. In this slide, what you're seeing here is the median sale price versus the median assessor's estimated market value. So the blue line really represents what the sales transactions are in the market. So that's the actual sales of property, but the orange line is where was our assessed value in relationship to what the properties were selling. So if you take a look at, let's say 2013, we were about 15% behind the market. When things were selling, our assessed values were lagging behind what the market was going on. As you can tell, as you go further to the right, that we've gotten much, much better, much, much closer to the point where actually in 2019, we were right at or a hair above what things were selling for. And there was probably then a correlation to the previous chart where we showed you the spike in appeals. I'm sure that had something to do with it as well. But today we're at about a 95, 96% sales ratio based on what properties are selling for. And that's you can see that under the 2020 column. Next slide. This is an interesting map. So what this map represents, it's based on real estate sales across the city. So what this would tell us is, where did the assessor need to lower values? Where did the assessor need to hold values? And where did the assessor need to raise values? And it's all based on sales and the sales ratio. So if we take a look at North Minneapolis or in Camden, when we took a look at all the sales that had occurred last year or in that last sales period, we looked at what the sales were, what the sales price were, and then we took a look at what the assessed value was. And we needed to move those values anywhere from 7.5 to 10 or more than 10 to get the assessed value closer to what things are selling for. So then we take a look at, let's say, Southwest or Calhoun Isles. In those areas, we looked at those sales and we said, where was the assessed value in relationship to those sales? And in many cases, we were right in that 95, 96%, which is oftentimes our target, or we were right at 100%. So when we're right at that 95, 96, which is our target market, and that's within the sales ratio band that is recommended by the Department of Revenue, we would then at that point choose not to be changing values based on that. Now, this is on a parcel level. We don't, on a large aggregate, we would not say, well, the Southwest quadrant doesn't change. We still do the analysis. We still, on parcel by parcel basis, some parcels will go up, some parcels will go down. But when we map it as an overall citywide, you kind of get a flavor for where we see the market going up, where we see the market flattening, and where we see the market going down. Next slide. Here's the appeals count. I guess I thought I'd already seen this slide. So this you'll see that we've seen a spike since about 2017, 2018 in the number of appeals. Even though it's fairly dramatic on this sheet, it's still only about 1%. So 99% of the population, or the 99% of the owners, don't appeal. We have about a 1% population that does appeal their values on an annual basis. So next slide. So this slide shows the overall estimated market value by ward. So what you would see is how much value is carried in each ward, and when you sum up all the wards, you would come up with the total market value of the city. The line that I would probably highlight the most, because in most cases it doesn't change much more than 1 or 2% up or 2% down. But in Ward 3, we see it goes from 12.8% in 2010 to 18.6% today. So a significant growth in Ward 3, probably because of the council member. They really like their council member, I think. So anyway, then we have the median estimated market value on the table below. And what you'll find, if you actually start from the left and move right, that in 2010, 2011, 2012, you actually do see the assessor's office following values down. And then we plateaued in about 2013. And then from 2013 on, you'll see that the market value, we've been tracking with that market value up as the market's been going up as well. And I think the next slide is my last slide. And this is the commercial industrial growth history by a sub-market. And I felt that because you might have an interest in the sub-market, we picked the hotel, the industrial, the office, medical, retail, other commercial, and land. And then what we provided you is how much commercial or how much construction has taken place in those sub-markets, the 1-year growth, the 5-year growth, and the 10-year growth over time. And with that, I will stand for questions. That completes my report.
Thank you so much for that. That's fascinating information. I just want to remind everybody on the committee, if you have questions, please do put them in the meeting chat so I can recognize you. Board Member Wheeler, I recognize you.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. You can hear me. Sorry about that. Thank you very much. There's some very good information in here, Mr. Todd. I appreciate it. A couple of things, technically it's less money or less percentage, but the reality for people is that's not where they are. They see what they're paying and that it's going up, and that's why they get concerned. Now, I just so happened to get my little thing in the mail not too long ago here, and I live in a conversion of an old apartment building into a condo in Uptown, 1926, and values have gone up, and I understand that. I had a $15,000 increase this year over last year for the projected 2021. But what I found really interesting was you decreased the homestead market value exclusion. So you increased significantly my property value, in the neighborhood of about 8-9%, something like that. But then you decreased the exclusion, and I didn't quite understand. It's sort of like a double whammy, and why it would go down. What's the reason that has happened? And it's the valuation. It's a $16,000 difference in my little 2-bedroom, 900 square foot condo, but it is an 8.5% increase.
Council, or Board Member Becker and Council Member Wheeler, that is a very great observation. That is the homestead is called a homestead exclusion. The homestead exclusion would be is that if you're assessed at $76,000, you're going to get about a $307 reduction in your property taxes. As your value goes up, the exclusion goes away. So by the time you hit, I think it's $413,000, you have no exclusion remaining. So it's I often use the term, it's a declining credit. So as the value goes up, your exclusion goes away. That is something that number hasn't been changed. That formula has not been changed for, I would say, 10 to 15 years. Might be something to look at, but for the most part, you're right. As the value goes up, the exclusion goes away, so it does hurt a little bit more. But that's the formula, and that formula is used across every residential property in the state of Minnesota.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Board Member Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to state the obvious that we will all have a lot of decisions to make about our upcoming budget during a time of both public health and economic crisis in our community, and certainly the decisions that we will all make about the levy amount will impact the amount of property taxes paid. So we did have some discussion about that at the council meeting where Mr. Todd was able to present similar information. I just wanted to note that because I'm sure it's on everyone's mind, as well as us members of this body. It's always important that we work together to be fiscally responsible and prudent and transparent, but even more now than ever. And so I think we are in the process of reviewing the 2020 budget. Mayor Fry has put in place some budget saving measures already. And then again, of course, looking forward to 2021. So these assessments, of course, are related to people's ultimate payment of property taxes, but we also have that additional layer of the levy that we will pass later this year. And so I wanted to just state that. And then I also wanted to highlight, I was trying to find the information about the property tax refund that's available to renters, because I know over the years we've done some work to try to publicize that. And it seems, again, kind of to the point about budgets and individual financial burdens, that would be important for us to share, as individual council members through our newsletters, especially those of us who have a lot of renters in our wards. So just wanted to just flag that for us as we're thinking about how to help our community through this time.
Sure.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to be recognized? I have a few questions, but I just want to open up to see if there's anyone else who wants to be recognized at this time. All right. Couple questions for you. Mr. Todd, over the last 6 years, we've seen this huge amount of growth. My understanding is that virtually all of that has been rental and that very little of it has been home ownership. Now, I've seen numbers that said something like 1 out of every 12 units was ownership or something, 90% was apartments. Do you have any information on that?
Board member or board president Bender, we could probably go into our database and pull some data on that. Absolutely, but I wouldn't have that at my fingertips.
Okay, I would be interested in getting your presentation as well as
Sure.
If you had data on that question.
So could you restate exactly what you would be looking for? You want the
question I have is, like, over the last 6 years since we've seen this inflection, my sense of it is that virtually all of the housing that we have created has been rental property, primarily predominantly corporately owned, and not ownership opportunity that builds wealth for people who live in Minneapolis. And I'm curious about, I have that sense, and I've actually played around in your database, but I would be curious what your answer would be to what percentage of our new housing that we've created has been apartments and how much of it has been ownership. Is that something that we could answer? You could answer for me?
All right.
Thank you. Next question I wanted to ask is the map that you showed about where there's growth. I mean, it's hard for me not to say the word gentrification. Do you have any sense of what's driving that those increases in North so much faster than everyone else in the city here? I mean, do you have a sense of what's going on in the marketplace?
I could probably tell you, Madam President, or President Bender. No, President Becker.
It's all good. It's all good.
From my perspective, it's all about an affordability index. And if you were to go to the second to the last slide where we're looking at the median market value by ward, and we take a look at wards 4 and 5, there's a significant difference in the median market value in those areas. And if you go back in time, you didn't have to go back too far, let's say to 2017 in ward, let's say 5, we're talking at 141,000 and 134,000 is the median value just in 2018 and in 2019. So I think it's driven more by where is the most affordable housing left in Minneapolis. I truly believe that. But we also saw this curve, the significant increases when we came back out of foreclosure. We saw these significant increases in wards 13 and in 7 as well. So those markets came back, and so back in 2000, like 9, 10, 11, and 12, we were still dropping values in some of these areas when out of let's say in 4 and 5. But in 13, we were starting to raise values 5, 10, and 15%. So it just in the market swings. This is my opinion, is just that if you want to buy a house that's still affordable with today's interest rates, that's where you go first.
Okay, thank you very much for that. What's driving the spike in the appeals then, do you think?
I would just say that the taxes are a significant amount of people's budget. I don't think it's a reflection of the accuracy of the assessment. I think it's driven more by taxes.
Okay. Just that it's a reflection that taxes are getting higher and people are just becoming more concerned, or?
Well, I think that's the case, and similar to Board Member Wheeler, he's noticing that as the values go up, and we talk about the overall value, median value of the city of Minneapolis, that exclusion continues to decline. So it does have an impact. I also would say that what oftentimes is getting missed, and Council President Bender had made this point, is that there is what's called the M1 PR through the Department of Revenue, that if your taxes are disproportionately high compared to your income, you can get a percentage of that back. Or if your taxes are going up more than 12%, you're going to get some of that back. Or if you're a senior citizen and you can't afford it, there are programs out there that allow you to only have to pay $300 and then you can defer the rest. So I think that there are tools out there put out there by the legislature that can soften the blow. Many people don't take advantage of it, unfortunately, though.
Absolutely, I agree with that. My taxes look the same as Mr. Wheeler's, and I think I was around over 10% this year. And knowing that we have that much growth in the tax base, and we appreciate, that the tax base is growing, I'm still seeing a 10%. That's a big number. And my sister was at 14, so part of it is because of exactly the things that he talked about, which you're also referring to. Let's see if I had any other questions here. I think that's all my questions for today.
Thank you.
I would just say I do have one other question kind of in the same vein, not exactly on this presentation. And in that question of the changes that have happened in the growth over the last 6 years, I'm also trying to figure out whether, what size of housing have we added? My understanding from something I read at HUD was that 70% of the new housing has been one bedroom or less. I was hoping to try and confirm that through the assessor's office. I did put in a request. I did get some data back, haven't had a chance to look at it. But if you have just a little bit of time to throw at that question, I just have a question of whether or not we're building a lot of housing that is too small for families, especially families with children and families, people of color, which are generally speaking larger than white families. So
Sure.
if you had any thoughts on that offline, that would be awesome.
Perfect. Yes, we'll look into that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody have any other questions for the assessor's office? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Todd.
Have a nice day.
Take care.
Bye now.
All right, so the next item on the agenda, let me see. I don't have clerk, I don't have to do any motion on that. So the next item is a report relating to financial markets and city bonding and the city financial impact resulting from COVID-19. The city coordinator and finance staff will present the report.
President Becker, members of the board, this is Mark Ruff, the city coordinator, and we also have finance staff available for answering questions. Just want to give a brief overview, which is has been, I believe, in the media generally, which is we are expecting a revenue shortfall this year for the city. And when I use the city, I mean broadly all of the city enterprises, both general fund, downtown assets fund, which includes convention center and Target Center, our sewer, water, stormwater, parking fund. We are estimating in the range of $130 million shortfall this year. That number is, as you can expect, uncertain given the fact that we don't know exactly when some of the stay-at-home restrictions and their impacts on businesses will be lifted and how quickly it will be lifted. But we as staff are working with our mayor and city council on bringing forward options for them to consider later this spring for reductions in the 2020 budget. At the same time, then, we are also working on a bond issue, and this is one of the matters that will come in front of the board at your next meeting. A bond issue, the bond issue is primarily for costs that were already expended last year, meaning in 2019, including the special assessment projects that you regularly consider at your board meetings. That number is in the neighborhood of $30 million of reimbursements. We also have a significant number of projects which contracts have already been let for 2020. Some of those you are familiar with. The more high-profile ones would include the 10th Avenue Bridge and both the water and the roadway improvements associated with that. The Hennepin Avenue reconstruction is another significant project that's underway, as well as the many smaller projects that are under the 20-year Parks and Streets plan. So the enterprise fund, the sewer, water, stormwater associated costs that are estimated in 2020 for those contracts is in the $25 to $30 million range. And again, it's not just those larger projects, it's even things like that we do expect to have savings on over time. For example, some solar arrays up at the Fridley water plant are going to bring obviously operational savings, which will help cover the debt service. We have some long overdue electrical improvements out at the water treatment facilities, which are also part of a longer term plan. So that's again, a wide variety of those expenditures. And then we have, as I said, the parks and streets and just normal bridge work that's done. And again, that's in the neighborhood of a $20 to $30 million average annual expenditure. So I think part of what we've talked about is what we can do to reduce expenses in 2020 and assure that we have enough cash to make our payments. So as you are aware, there's also the county board took action this week to defer the property tax payments for smaller taxpayers. And so it's very important that we issue debt in order to have cash on hand to meet our regular expenses and not be owing funds and having negative balances in our funds, because that obviously would not help in our bond ratings, nor is it best practices from a financial perspective. The other benefit of borrowing money today is interest rates are incredibly low. And so the fact that we can take advantage of that low interest rate will help reduce some of the costs and some of the impacts, not just in 2021, but beyond. So Mr. Ablin, I'm sure will at your next Board of Estimate and Taxation meeting be able to go over the details of each one of those projects. But I think we just wanted to be able to share with you the fact that we are a large enterprise when we include both the park board with all of our business lines in the enterprise funds, and as well as just our regular street improvement and park improvement projects. But we and remember that our total budget overall is in the neighborhood of $1.7 billion. So while the numbers that I talk about of over $100 million is a very large number and one that concerns us, it is again still less than 10% of the total budget, and a major part of our budget are capital expenditures. I think a major policy choice for all of you when you are looking toward 2021 is to what level will we continue that capital investment, and to what level do you want to see some reduction in that capital investment, which also then would result in lower expenditures in terms of tax expenditures, as well as lower pressure on water and sewer rates. And so that's clearly a policy choice that's unrelated to the immediate bond issue, but would be one that would be important, because that would be reflected then potentially in a smaller bond issue in 2021. So with that, I'll pause and certainly take any questions, but just wanted to give that high-level overview.
Thank you so much. I'll open it up to the board for questions. Please put your request to speak in the meeting chat. My first time at this, so please be gentle with me. All right, I'm going to give folks a couple minutes if they want. I have a couple questions that I'd like to ask Mr. Ruff. Of that $130 million, some of that must be in the general fund. What are you guys forecasting for collections for this year? And what cash is the county going to advance cash to us? If I see they're going to not have penalties for late payment until I think June 15th. So kind of two questions there.
For property taxes, the county has indicated that it is July 15th. It is a 2-month delay, and that they will make a payment to us at the end of July based on those receipts. So that is the assumption that we are working under.
And what is the collection rate that you are assuming for this? I know during the Great Recession, our collection rate, I think, went down to 93%. If I'm remembering off the top of my head, it was 10 years ago. But and that caused significant issues within the fiscal year and significant cash flow problems.
Right. I think we would expect that we would be at least at that same range of 93% rather than our typical 98 to 99%.
Is that then included in your 130 million shortfall estimate?
There's two elements to property tax shortfalls. One would be just what is deferred, right? In other words, you eventually will collect it. And then the other is just relating to the assessor's previous comments, which is how much are people going to be protesting their values and what does that result in a loss, right? And those are difficult to separate at this time. So we are just going with a collection rate assumption and not separating out those at this time.
Okay, but you're in the 93% range?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would see at least a 5% increase in delinquencies is what our projections are suggesting. I think we will pay close attention to the actual collections in July and be able to revise then at a period of time. I do expect that this will these decisions that will be in front of the mayor and the council in terms of the 2020 budget will take probably at least twice during the year. We would expect that, as I said, during the summer, we will come back with some kind of budget adjustment, and then we will watch and see what happens with the economy and with some of these other factors that we've talked about, and would likely have something later in 2020 if a budget adjustment, or if we want to be optimist, maybe even bringing back some of the savings that we have cut. But we are always erring on the side of conservative from that standpoint.
I understand. Can you give us a quick overview of what's happened with the sales tax?
So the Department of Revenue has allowed people, businesses, primarily obviously who pay sales tax, to defer those payments. The Department of Revenue is actually paying us, unlike what we talked about with property tax. They're actually paying us based on the what are the tax returns. So every month a business has to provide not just a payment, but a tax return associated with justifying why they're making that payment. And so they are being more timely and is helping us in the cash flow at this time. We don't know if that's going to change, but that's been the practice so far.
Do you know how much the sales taxes have declined from the last couple months?
So they do not release the information to us in terms of what the actual returns are. So I can't tell you year over year. I can tell you, and we have this lag, and so we are not going to know for a month or two as to how much the decrease was. I can tell you just from a hotel occupancy standpoint, the drop off is dramatic. It is, I mean, going from, basically having revenue that is 5 to 10% of the previous year's revenue when it comes to hotels.
Wow, that's part of why I'm curious about what kind of hole that's going to leave. What year does the Viking Stadium money come in? Is that coming in yet? I don't remember the exact timing of that.
If you're referring to the diversion of the sales tax from the convention center to the U.S. Bank Stadium payments, that starts in 2021.
Who has first claim on that money?
The state collects sales tax. The state receipts sales tax out of our income. So it is a state determined process of allocation.
Well, we have a contract with the state. I mean, the state does it because we have the state under contract with us to collect on our behalf. So would we? I'm just wondering, like, if the sales tax is still collapsed next year. You might not know off the top of your head. It's just a question.
I'd be happy to follow up with you later on if there's some specific question, and we could have our sales tax experts help in that response.
Okay. Have we seen a decline in water and sewer payments just the last month or two? Do we have non-payment percentages?
I think it's less about non-payment percentages, although we certainly have had that occasion, but there's also a significant reduction in usage just because we do import jobs into the city of Minneapolis. And so when we don't have as many people coming in on a daily basis to their workplaces, that is a net reduction in just water and sewer usage.
Do we have any numbers on that?
I do not. That could be certainly a request to the Public Works Department, but we have not calculated that at this time.
Okay. And part of why I'm asking, do we see at any point that we are going to have to do short-term borrowing, either for cash or other budget needs? Because if we don't have cash coming in from property taxes until July, we don't have people coming into the city and drinking water and flushing the toilets. If the sales tax funds, especially like the lodging tax, the entertainment tax, have basically collapsed, are we going to have a cash problem, or are we going to have to do borrowing?
We do not anticipate borrowing for cash flow purposes and that's again part of the reason we want to do the borrowing for capital purposes, is to just keep ourselves current on our bills. And so we are not anticipating front-end loading and, for example, trying to borrow more money than we know we're going to need this year. And we also, I would just say that if we need to do any borrowing, it could be just done on an interfund loan basis. And so just like any year, there are times where our general fund actually dips into the negative because of the distance between property tax receipts and our local government aid receipts. And so it's not unusual to have some negative balances for a short period of time that we do interfund borrowing essentially, or just essentially lending money to ourselves. But is that a possibility on a longer term basis for maybe the general fund? Yes, but do we have adequate cash balances across the enterprise to be able to handle that? And it's not a long-term concern today. We'll again reevaluate at the end of the year.
But if like I said, you know, when I played with your guys' budget, and this was a long time ago now, you know, we could move money from water and sewer over to the general fund, or, you know, things like that. But if all of our revenues are, I don't want to say the word collapsing, but coming down substantially, would we have a cash flow point at some point throughout the year that we'd have to borrow?
We don't anticipate this at this time. I think the example I used of hotels is an outlier. It's not the mean.
Okay. Okay. On the expenditure side, do we have any ability to, within this year, reduce capital projects or shift money between capital and operating?
Depends on what you're talking about with capital. We are certainly looking at equipment. We are looking at software. We are looking at all non-personnel expenditures as a way of reducing those, which would help then reduce the pressure on revenues for all of our funds. So that is underway and is being done at a small level and a larger level. So that's typical for any adjustment process.
Okay.
You know, the projects themselves will just have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, and a decision as to whether the pricing of the bids, for example, in a larger capital project are such that we think it makes sense to move forward. It depends on the condition of the asset that it's replacing and whether we can wait 2 or 4 or 5 years to wait to replace it, or whether it's something that's been really run into the ground at this stage and it doesn't make good operational sense to not replace it. So I can't say that, you know, our recommendations to staff, and ultimately it's up to the council and mayor in terms of bids that haven't been formally approved yet as to what their approach is going to be, but we're trying to be balanced in that approach, that some assets continue to need to be replaced, and it would be unwise to just completely turn off the spigot.
Okay. All right. That's the list of questions I have. Does anyone else have any questions? Anyone else have any questions? All right. I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you, Mr. Ruff. I appreciate the time, and thank you for answering the questions. I know these are tough times and tough questions, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing. All right. Let me see. I'm going to check my and clerk, do we need to receive and file these reports?
Madam President, if there's no objection from the members, those reports can be received and filed.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Do we have any announcements, any direction to staff, any agenda items people would like to see for the next meeting?
I have not an agenda item, but I want to say a special thank you to Abdi Warsami, who served on this Board of Estimate and Taxation very well over the course of the years that he was with us. He helped, was in the process of helping to find our new staff person in Alan Hoppy. And I just, he was at our last meeting, and in fact, he made the final motion to adjourn. And I don't think we had an opportunity to say thank you to him. And so somehow we need to get that back to him. And a warm welcome to Steve. We're delighted that you're here and helping us out too. Carol, I don't hear anything. Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me now? Oh, I was just going to say thank you for saying that. Steve, you're here, but you're here virtually, and I can't actually see, so I apologize for not recognizing you.
I'm here. No.
Thank you very much for serving. We appreciate it. And yes, thank you to Mr. Wasabi for having served on the board. So with that, we've concluded all the businesses to come before the board. Without objection, I'd like to have us stand adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Made and seconded.
We don't have to vote to end. Shut any meeting. Shut it all off.